Welcome to part 2 of my how-to for getting SyncSort EMR up and running. I'm assuming that you have watched part 1 and have your own cluster and Windows instance and ETL server already going. We are now need to do a little bit of preparation on the Windows instance before we actually go and run our first job. So what we need to do, I'll show in this slide, we need to set up a SOC 5 proxy on the Windows instance in order to make things go smoothly. The reason for doing so is because of the AWS firewalls that are set up between all the instances. We need to set up a proxy tunnel basically in order to access the Hadoop web interfaces and HDFS. So what we'll be doing is we'll be copying our PEM file that we used in putting up those instances in part 1 to the Windows instance. We're going to generate a PuTTY key from that for use with PuTTY because that's what's installed in the Windows instance. And then we're going to start up our SOC proxy. Anything in orange here is what you will replace with your own name. So your own name for the PPK, which is the PuTTY version of the private key, and the EMR master node IP addresses or host names. So let's start by going back to the Amazon console, and I have a couple IP addresses that I'm going to need. One is for the ETL server, which is this last instance, and the other is for the master node of the cluster. And let me just show you quickly what I've done to make things a little bit easier on the Windows side. I have copied the names of those nodes, and I'm just going to bring them over onto Windows for ease of use. Again, I have on my Windows instance with remote desktop, which was shown in the first video. And I'll just start a text file here. And copy these so that I have them at hand. So the next thing is I need to copy my PEM file over to the Windows instance. And I happen to be on Windows, so the easiest way in that case is to just go Windows to Windows. So I'll copy my PEM file from my local machine and bring up some reasonable place to place it on my remote instance. Paste it in, and we're ready to go. So the first part of our slide indicated that we needed to create the PuTTY version of this PEM file. And again, what we need to do is create the private key for use by PuTTY from our PEM file. So we do cutilities PuTTYgen, load our PEM file. I have to choose all files so it'll show up. It says it's successfully imported. Now we save the private key. It's asking me if I want a passphrase. For this video, I will not put one in. And then best practice is to choose a similar name to our PEM file, but give it a PPK suffix. And then we're done with PuTTYgen. So now we're ready to open up our SOC proxy. And we do that by running PuTTY -I, and we tell it where our key is. And then we have to use the port 8157 because this Windows instance is configured to use 8157 as the proxy. Log in as Hadoop and we need the name, need the host or IP of our master node. And we paste that into the window. And then that will actually open up a shell prompt on the master node, but we don't need to use it. We'll use the ETL server instance as our edge node for submitting jobs and so forth. So at that point, our setup on the Windows server is complete. And at this point, we're ready to do the fun stuff, to bring up the development environment and open up and run a job. So one thing I want to point out is that everything is called DM Express here. DM Express Task Editor, DM Express Job Editor, but the product that you chose from Marketplace is Ironcluster. Well, for now, we can consider that those two names are synonymous. Before we had a product that ran in the cloud, we call it DM Express, and we have not, as of July 2014, completed the name change across the product line. So don't mean to confuse you, but just consider those things synonymous, DM Express or DMX or Ironcluster. So what we need to do to bring up a job and start developing is to use the job editor. So Ironcluster also has jobs and tasks, kind of like Hadoop, but we start out with the job editor to give the overall workflow. The first time it comes up, it brings up a reminder that you have online help. It's excellent. The online help is a complete reference for the product. So whenever you're stuck, be sure to look up help from the help menu and choose topics. And for instance, if you search for Hadoop, you'll have some information about running jobs on Hadoop clusters. And there's a number of really good reference pages in there that will be very helpful. So what we're going to do in this video is bring up one of the use case accelerators and run it. So that means going to File, Open Job, and then we'll need to browse to the ETL server where our use case accelerator information resides. So that will be a secure FTP connection, and you could use password or public key. I'll choose password. And then we'll need, once again, the IP address, this time of the ETL server. Paste that in. We're going to use the Hadoop user with the password that you chose in the in part one of these videos. We'll verify the connection. Only have to do that once. And then we have an active browsing connection. So this is happening on the browsing the Linux server, which is our ETL server, and I'm going to choose UCA as we had before. Remember, that's at the root directory. And I'll go to Jobs, and let's choose File, Change Data Capture. And we'll open up the Hadoop jobs, and there's only one job in there. And then we can zoom into this and see what this looks like. So this is change data capture using only files from HDFS that is run on Mapreduce. And the assumption is that both sides of this join will be too large to fit on any one data node. So we'll have to run it as a reduced side join. So this basically is the template for a reduced side join. And I'm kind of bringing up kind of the hardest one first because you're most likely to be wondering how to do things like you do in the data warehouse. That's a common use case for SyncSource customers. So we try to provide those things that are not immediately apparent. The difference between how you do things in a relational model versus how you do it on Mapreduce. So before we can run the job, we're going to have to be connected to the server where we want the job to run. And in order to do that, of course, you can click the Run button or just connect to the server. And I do that by choosing the Status button, and it asks me what server I want to connect to. So you should be presented with a dialog like this. What it wants is the ETL server. That is our edge node. So we go back to our addresses, and this should be the last time we need to do something like this, because now we'll have our connection saved. I connect to the server as user Hadoop. And I'm then presented with a dialog box for the server. The one thing that you will need to do here is you will have HDFS server will be blank because Ironcluster won't know what to fill that in with at first. So you have to go back to your IPs and choose the master node because that's where the name node is running for HDFS. So we choose that, we fill that in. This is all in the documentation in the PDF as well. And we should be good to go now. In order to test out that we're truly ready, I like to give a little sample of the source data. So I right mouse click on one of the source files and choose sample. And then that's an HDFS connection. And once that is accepted, voila, I see my source data, and it's already been defined by the Hadoop job, by the Ironcluster task, I should say. And so in this case, it's been given column names and types, and so we should be good to go. So in order to run from the GUI, there's also ways to run it from the shell, of course. I can choose run and then click on Hadoop cluster and make sure everything looks good there, and then simply submit the job. So this will be the very first job that runs on our cluster. If we want to look at the log from the job editor, I can just click on detail, and it will say that the job was run on the Hadoop cluster as Mapreduce. Let me maximize this window. And then I can periodically click on refresh to see how it's going. So it has been submitted. And of course, at this point, you can switch to the job tracker in the web browser if you want to watch the job run from there and look at the logs. But if I want to look at the overall submission job, I can just click refresh periodically from this dialog. And I said that the data was big, but our sample data for use case accelerators is not big, so it ran rather quickly. And then at this point, you can go and switch to the shell, for instance. Just want to show that that can be seen from the shell as well. And we'll look at Hadoop fs-ls. It writes things to the Hadoop relative paths. Look at the target directory, and we have a thing called CDC results. And if we take a look at what was produced there, then we'll see we have our output. And this is a single file CDC. So what we've done to the result is added a column at the beginning, which is going to be a flag for delete, update, or insert. So it looks like that worked, and there is much to go into the actual development, but that's not for this video, since this part 1 and part 2 is all about just setting it up and getting it ready to go. There are other videos in the marketplace that I had shown in part 1 that will show use case examples, or go to syncsort.com and look for some of those videos, and I will increasingly have more detailed examples on my own YouTube channel. So thanks for joining, and that's the end of how to set up and run Ironcluster for EMR. Thanks.